I cried the day my son asked me to sign away my house. Not because I was confused. Not because I was weak. And not because I did not understand what those papers meant. I cried because I finally understood exactly how little they thought of me. The pen felt too smooth in my hand, silver and cold, the kind of expensive pen people place in front of you when they want a hard thing to feel elegant. My son, Daniel, sat across from me at the dining room table I had bought 22 years earlier from a church rummage sale, and refinished myself in the garage. The late afternoon light came in through the kitchen blinds in pale stripes, falling over the stack of papers between us. His wife, Kendra, stood by the sink with her arms folded, pretending to give us privacy while listening to every word. "Mom," Daniel said, and his voice had that careful softness people use when they are trying to dress selfishness up as concern. "This is just temporary. It's a formality. The lender says it'll make everything cleaner." Cleaner. That word stayed with me. There was a roast in the oven, under season because my hands had been shaking when I rubbed it with salt and garlic. I could smell onions browning in the pan, buttery and sweet, and beneath it all, the faint lemon scent of the furniture polish I had used that morning. My house smelled like every Sunday my son had ever known. Warm food, clean wood, safety. And there he was, asking me to sign it away like he was asking me to pass the gravy. I looked down at the pages without touching them. There were blocks of dense language, neat signature lines, and my own name typed in black ink like it belonged to somebody older, lonelier, easier to move around. The ceiling fan turned above us with a slow click at the end of each rotation. Click, click, click. "You said this dinner was just family," I told him. "It is family," Kendra answered before Daniel could speak. I turned and looked at her. She smiled, but it was the tight smile of a woman who already thought she had won something. Kendra had beautiful teeth and a habit of showing them at the wrong times. I had noticed that about her from the beginning. Daniel rubbed his palms on his jeans the way he used to do as a little boy when he was nervous about apologizing for something. For one foolish second, my heart softened. I saw the child in him, the boy who used to run to me after a nightmare, hair damp against his forehead, asking if he could sleep on the floor beside my bed. But grown sons can still break your heart. Sometimes they do it more efficiently than strangers. "I'm not trying to upset you," he said. "You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." That was when I felt it. Not just hurt, clarity. Because a good man does not need to say that while sliding legal papers across his mother's table. I lifted the first page and read more carefully. My eyes passed over property description, transfer terms, beneficiary language. I kept my face calm, though my pulse had begun to pound behind my ears. It was not exactly what he had said on the phone. It was not a simple adjustment. It was not a housekeeping detail. This was an exit plan. For me. Where did these come from? I asked. Daniel glanced at Kendra. It was a small glance, less than a second, but I saw it. Mothers always see it. "Our attorney helped draft them," he said. "Our?" I asked quietly. Kendra stepped forward then, laying manicured fingers against the back of a chair. "Daniel and I are just trying to think about the future. Taxes, probate, liability, all the things that happen when people don't plan ahead." People. Not mothers. Not family. Not the woman whose name was still on the paperwork that made their life possible. Just people. Outside, a car passed slowly with its bass thumping through the neighborhood. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice. Ordinary sounds. That was the strange thing about betrayal. The world never pauses for it. The onion's still brown. The fan still clicks. The sun still moves across the floorboards as if nobody's life has just tilted. I set the papers down and folded my hands in my lap, so they would not tremble. My voice surprised even me when I spoke. It was steady, almost gentle. "Why do you need my house, Daniel?" His face changed. Just for a moment, his expression hardened into something impatient, something almost embarrassed. "We're not taking your house, Mom." "Aren't you?" Silence spread across the room. The roast hissed in the oven. Kendra looked at Daniel again, and that little exchange between them told me more than any document could. They had discussed this, rehearsed it, maybe in their car, maybe in their bed, maybe over coffee in a kitchen I had helped pay for. And still they thought I would sign. The truth is, this did not begin at my dining room table. By then, the betrayal had already happened. The papers were only the final insult, the polished handle on a knife already buried. If I had understood earlier what they were doing, maybe I would have spared myself months of humiliation. Then again, maybe I needed to see it play out slowly. Maybe some lessons do not arrive like thunder. Maybe they come like a leak behind the wall. Quiet, hidden, spreading damage before you smell the rot. A year earlier, I would have told anyone who asked that Daniel was a good son. Not perfect. Never that. He could be distracted, impulsive, too eager to please the loudest person in the room. But he had once been tender, loyal, the kind of boy who brought me grocery store flowers with crumpled allowance money and said, "These look like your color." I raised him alone after his father left when Daniel was 9. Not died. Left. There is a difference, and women like me know it in our bones. His father packed a duffel bag one humid July morning and said he needed space. As though space was something you could gather from the hallway closet and carry with you. He kissed Daniel on the head, promised to call, and became the kind of man who sends birthday texts at 11:48 p.m. to prove he remembered the date. So it was Daniel and me after that. We learned each other's silences. We built routines sturdy enough to survive disappointment. Pancakes on Saturdays. Laundry folded on my bed while old Motown played from the radio in the kitchen. Spaghetti on payday Fridays. Christmas ornaments made from salt dough because store-bought decorations felt extravagant when the water heater was already making that sound again. I worked for 19 years as an administrative assistant at a dental office in Columbus, Ohio, where the waiting room always smelled faintly of mint and antiseptic. I packed my lunch in the same blue cooler bag for over a decade. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, tea in a thermos during winter. I saved where I could. I did without when I had to. And when Daniel got into a decent state college, I stood in the parking lot after dropping him off and cried into the steering wheel. Not because I was sad, exactly, but because I had made it that far. I had kept my promise. He came home after college taller, broader, smelling faintly of cedar cologne and ambition. For a while he was easy to be proud of. He found a job with a regional logistics company, wore button-down shirts, started talking about retirement accounts and interest rates. When he introduced me to Kendra, he was 30, and I remember thinking she looked like the sort of woman who had never had to patch a hem by hand. She was pretty in a polished way, with shiny chestnut hair and a voice that could sound sweet from across a room and sharp from 2 feet away. She sold real estate, or at least she said she did. She spoke quickly, confidently, always as if the next better thing was just one decision away. At first, I truly tried. That is important for me to say, because when people hear a story like this, they like to sort everyone into tidy little boxes. The saintly mother, the greedy daughter-in-law, the weak son. But real life is messier than that. People arrive with their own histories, their own hungers, their own private fears. And sometimes what ruins a family is not one monstrous act. Sometimes it is 100 small permissions. The first time I met Kendra, I made pot roast. It was late October, cool enough that the kitchen windows fogged a little from the heat of the oven. I had braided carrots with potatoes into the roasting pan, and laid out my good napkins, the cream-colored ones I saved in the sideboard for holidays and company. I remember hearing their car pull into the driveway, and wiping my hands on a dish towel before I looked through the curtains. Daniel got out first, smiling in that open way he had when he was excited to be loved by someone. Kendra came around the passenger side in a camel-colored coat and high boots that clicked smartly against the walkway. She carried a bottle of wine in one hand and her purse in the crook of her elbow, like she had stepped out of a catalog. When I opened the door, Daniel kissed my cheek. "Mom, this is Kendra." She leaned in for a hug that was careful not to wrinkle her coat. She smelled expensive, vanilla, amber, something powdery underneath. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said brightly. "Daniel talks about you all the time." Please call me Lorraine," I said. "Well," she said smiling, "then you have to call me Kendra." It was a perfectly normal exchange. A nice one even. But there was something practiced in the way she spoke, as if she knew how to build instant warmth without offering any real piece of herself. Still, I welcomed her in. Over dinner, she praised everything. The roast, the table, the framed cross-stitch in the hallway, the little herb garden over my sink. She had a way of complimenting that felt like a praising. Her eyes never rested long in one place. They moved the way buyers' eyes move, taking inventory, assigning value. At one point, Daniel mentioned that I had lived in that house for 27 years. Kendra set down her fork. 27? In this market, that's incredible. I laughed softly. I didn't know my house was a market. She laughed too, but hers came half a beat late. You know what I mean, she said. Homes with this much character are hard to find now. Character. That word, too, would come back to me later. The evening passed well enough. She helped clear the dishes, though I noticed she rinsed each plate only enough to appear helpful before setting it beside the sink. Daniel looked happy, and happiness in your child can make you forgive instincts you do not yet know how to name. They married 18 months later in a small outdoor ceremony at a winery outside the city. The vines were bare but pretty, and the reception barn had strings of warm lights overhead that made everything look softer than it really was. I wore a navy dress and sensible heels. Kendra wore satin and a smile that never slipped, not once. Even when the caterer forgot the vegetarian entree for her cousin. Daniel cried when he saw her walking toward him. I cried too, though mine was the quieter kind. The kind mothers cry when a chapter closes without asking their permission. For the first year or so, things seemed ordinary. They rented a townhouse on the north side, hosted game nights with friends who all used words like equity and networking, and came by every few Sundays for dinner if Kendra wasn't absolutely buried. That was one of her favorite phrases. Buried. Slammed. Swamped. Her life always sounded like an emergency she was somehow too important to slow down from. Daniel changed in subtle ways after the wedding. Nothing dramatic at first. Just little shifts. He answered texts later. Left visits earlier. Started speaking in that blended marital language where every opinion became, we, even when I knew perfectly well whose voice I was hearing. We think the neighborhood you're in is changing. We've been talking about whether your upstairs is too much for you long term. We feel like financial planning should happen before a crisis. That last one came during brunch one Sunday, while Kendra pushed avocado around her plate and asked whether I had a will. I looked up from buttering my toast. I'm sorry. She sipped her coffee. I just mean everybody should have one. So many families get torn apart over estates. Daniel nodded like a man who had stumbled into agreement before realizing where he was standing. She's right, Mom. It's just smart. I smiled, though something inside me tightened. I do have things in order. Kendra raised her brows. Good. You'd be surprised how many people don't. People again. Always people, as if she had a way of flattening the intimate into the abstract, so she would never have to admit she was talking about me. I let it go. That was my mistake. I let too many things go because I thought maturity meant patience. Because I believed love, if handled gently enough, could correct itself. Then came the house. It started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. I had just come home from work, changed into my house sweater, and put a pan of cornbread in the oven. The sky had gone that flat steel gray that makes the whole neighborhood look as if someone turned the color down. When my phone rang and I saw Daniel's name, I smiled before I answered. Hey, baby. Hey, Mom. He sounded breathless. Excited. You busy? Only if you count arguing with cornbread batter as being busy. He laughed. I've got news. There was a softness in his voice that took me back years. College acceptance. First promotion. Engagement. My heart opened before I knew what was coming. We found a house, he said. I leaned against the kitchen counter. You did? Yeah. Well, we think we did. It's perfect, Mom. 3 bedrooms, little fenced yard, older maple out front, finished basement. It's in Westerville, near good schools. Not that we need schools yet, he added with a short laugh. But you know. I could hear Kendra in the background saying something too muffled to make out. That sounds wonderful, I said. When do I get to see it? There was a pause then. A small one, but real. That's the thing, Daniel said. We hit a snag. The word sat cold in my ear. The lender says because Kendra's commission income fluctuates and I changed jobs last year, underwriting is being difficult. I knew enough about life to hear the ask forming before he made it. Difficult how? They'll approve us if we have a stronger cosigner. I closed my eyes. The cornbread timer clicked in the oven, but I didn't move. Daniel. Mom, listen first, okay? It's not forever. Just to secure the mortgage. We'll refinance as soon as we can. The loan officer even said it's common. Common. Another word that tries to make risk sound harmless. I went quiet long enough that he rushed to fill the silence. You wouldn't be paying anything. We've done the math. We can cover it easily. It's literally just to help us get in the door. I looked out the kitchen window at the wet patio, at the bird feeder swinging in the rain. Everything in me wanted to say no. Not because I didn't love my son, but because I had spent half a lifetime learning what it costs when women sign papers for men they trust. But then I pictured him as a boy on the last day of 5th grade, standing in a wrinkled white shirt at the school awards assembly, scanning the crowd until he found me. The way his whole face lit up just because I had come. A mother can be ambushed by her own memories. When would you need to know? I asked. His exhale was immediate, relieved. We're supposed to meet Friday. I should have said no. Instead, I asked for the address. They took me to see the house the next afternoon. Kendra met us there in heels that sank into the damp lawn, and a blazer the color of cream. The house was lovely, I will admit that. Not huge but bright. Red brick, black shutters, a porch swing somebody had left behind. The living room had old hardwood floors and a bay window that caught the afternoon light. The kitchen needed updating, though Kendra was already talking about knocking down a wall. This breakfast nook could be stunning, she said, spinning slowly in the center of the room. Open shelving here, quartz there, maybe a beverage station. Daniel grinned at me. Can't you see us here? I could. And maybe that was the problem. I could see Thanksgiving dinners. Future grandchildren with muddy shoes. Christmas stockings on a mantle. I could see my son becoming settled, rooted, safer than his father had ever been. I should have been looking at numbers. At liability. At the fact that hope is not a legal strategy. Instead, I put my hand on the original banister, felt the worn wood under my palm, and let love make the decision. At the loan office on Friday, I signed a stack of documents under fluorescent lights while a young man with polished hair explained terms too quickly and smiled too often. Standard guarantor language, he said, tapping the page. Kendra squeezed Daniel's arm. Daniel thanked me 3 separate times before we even left the building. In the parking lot, he hugged me so tightly my glasses slipped. You saved us, Mom. No. That was the lie. What I had actually done was place my good name inside a machine I did not fully trust, and hand other people the buttons. For a little while after that, I let myself believe I had done something beautiful. That is the danger of being needed. It can make even a bad arrangement feel holy. The closing happened fast, faster than I expected. Within 3 weeks, Daniel and Kendra had the keys, the moving boxes, the celebratory photos on social media. Kendra posted a picture of them standing on the front porch holding a wooden sign that said Home Sweet Home in white cursive letters. Daniel's arm was around her shoulders. Her hand was spread across his chest, ring shining. Underneath she wrote, "Dreams do come true. So grateful for new beginnings, hard work, and family support." Family support. No names, of course. No mention that the support had come with my credit, my liability, and all the risk sitting quietly behind their smiling faces. Still, I pressed the little heart button like everybody else. I brought over curtains, a box of old kitchen towels I had been saving, and the standing mixer I used maybe twice a year. I showed up on a Saturday with pimento cheese sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, because moving always makes people forget to eat. Daniel met me at the door wearing an old college t-shirt and sweat darkening the back of it. He looked happy. Tired but happy. Mom, you didn't have to bring all this. I know, I said. That's the beauty of being your mother. He smiled and kissed my temple. Inside, the house smelled like cardboard, fresh paint, and Kendra's vanilla candle already trying to cover both. Boxes were stacked in every room, each one labeled in thick black marker with her tidy all-caps handwriting. Kitchen. Guest linens. Master bath. Office. Not Daniel's office. Not our office. Office. Even then, I noticed those little territorial things. Kendra was in the kitchen directing 2 movers where to place bar stools that had not yet been assembled. She thanked me for the sandwiches, then immediately asked whether I thought the dining room light fixture looked too transitional. It was one of those questions people ask not because they value your opinion, but because they want an audience for theirs. By evening, I had unpacked half their dishes, lined drawers with shelf paper, and folded towels in the guest bathroom. Kendra announced that she and Daniel had decided to use the upstairs front room as a nursery someday. Someday, she said, drawing the word out like silk. Not tomorrow. But not never. Daniel glanced at her with that softened expression husbands wear when they are already halfway persuaded into the future. I stood in the doorway of that little room with its pale yellow walls and thought, maybe this is how families are built. Piece by piece. Favor by favor. Sacrifice by sacrifice. Maybe too, I wanted that to be true so badly that I ignored the first warning signs when they came. At the beginning, Daniel called often. Questions about utility bills. Lawn care. Which insurance company I liked. Whether I knew a good plumber. I felt useful, stitched into the new life I had helped secure. Then the tone shifted. The calls became shorter. Less warm. More transactional. Mom. Do you know if escrow usually adjusts after the first year? Mom. Can you check the wording on the statement they sent? Mom. We need a copy of the original paperwork. Kendra thinks the lender made an error. Each time he called, there was a little more of her in the background. Not necessarily speaking, but there. A pause before his answers. A slight repeating of her phrasing. The slow blending of his instincts into her ambitions. The first real sting came in June, about 2 months after they moved in. I had invited them over for Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy, fried chicken, green beans with bacon, mashed potatoes, peach cobbler. Daniel texted an hour beforehand to say they were running late. Then another text 20 minutes later. Actually, we're going to skip tonight. Kendra's aunt is in town, and we're doing something with her family instead. Rain check. I stood in the kitchen with the potatoes already mashed and butter melting into the bowl. Kendra's aunt. Her name was Denise. I had met her only once at the wedding, where she wore a plum-colored dress, drank too much champagne, and told me she had an eye for opportunity. She lived in Arizona, owned some kind of property management business, and spoke with the casual confidence of a woman who always expected the room to rearrange itself around her. I remember staring at Daniel's text and feeling foolishly disappointed. It was not a crime for a married couple to make other plans. I knew that. But disappointment has a texture all its own. It settles in the body like dampness. I ate alone that night at my kitchen table, while the local news murmured from the television in the den. The chicken skin had gone soft under the foil. The cobbler, which Daniel used to love warm with vanilla ice cream, sat untouched on the stove until morning. That was the first time I wondered whether helping them had shifted something in the balance between us. Whether my generosity had not drawn us closer, as I had imagined, but had instead made me easier to take for granted. Then came the money conversations. Not directly at first. Around the edges. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped by their place unannounced. Not to snoop, just to drop off tomatoes from my garden, and a jar of peach preserves. Daniel opened the door looking distracted, like he had forgotten what day it was. I heard voices from the kitchen. Kendra. A man I didn't recognize. Papers rustling. Oh, Daniel said. We're kind of in the middle of something. I lifted the bag a little. I won't stay. Just brought these. Kendra appeared behind him almost instantly, all lipstick and composure. Luraina. Sorry, we're meeting with someone. The man stepped into view then. Mid-40s, navy suit, shiny shoes, carrying a leather portfolio. He smiled the way professionals do when they are trying to appear harmless. Financial advisor, Kendra said quickly. Nothing dramatic. But there was something in the room I recognized immediately. Strategy. No laughter. No casual mes. Just charts on the kitchen island, a calculator, and the smell of coffee gone lukewarm. Daniel took the tomatoes, thanked me, and did not invite me in. As I walked back to my car, I told myself not to be sensitive. Married people make plans. Adults meet with advisors. Households have goals. Still, on the drive home, I remembered how Daniel used to call me from the grocery store to ask which pasta sauce I preferred if he was stopping by. How he once knew, without asking, that peonies were my favorite flower. Closeness does not always end with an explosion. Sometimes it thins quietly, like thread pulled one strand at a time. The second clue came from my bank. It was a plain envelope, the kind you almost mistake for junk mail. Inside was a notice regarding a credit inquiry connected to a mortgage account for which I was a guarantor. I had seen updates before, but this one referenced a file review and associated title documentation. That phrase bothered me. Associated title documentation. Not loan documents. Not payment history. Title. I read the letter twice standing at my kitchen counter, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. The refrigerator hummed behind me. The dogwood outside the window was starting to bloom. White petals bright against the fence. Ordinary, lovely things, while that phrase scraped at me like a loose nail. That evening, I called Daniel. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. Hey Mom. I got a notice from the bank. Pause. Okay. It mentions title documentation. Why would I be getting something about title? Another pause. Longer this time. Probably routine. Routine for what? I don't know, Mom. Kendra handles a lot of the paperwork stuff. That answer hit me wrong. Since when did my son not know what was happening on a house loan tied to my name? Daniel, I said carefully. Is there anything about that property I haven't been told? He gave a quick breathy laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. No. Of course not. But his voice had changed. A little tightness. A little haste. A little irritation that I had wandered too close to something. Then send me the latest paperwork, I said. I'm at dinner, he answered. Can this wait? There are moments in life when the silence after a sentence tells the truth more clearly than words. I stood there with the phone warm in my hand and knew, in the center of my chest, that something had already happened. Not might happen. Had happened. All right, I said. Enjoy your dinner. I hung up before he could soften it. That night I barely slept. The ceiling fan ticked above my bed in a tired rhythm. Cars hissed along the wet road outside from a brief spring rain. Around 2 in the morning, I got up, made chamomile tea, and sat in the dark kitchen with only the stove light on. I thought about the day I signed those papers. The speed of it. The too friendly loan officer. The way Kendra had stayed half a step ahead of every explanation. I thought about Denise, the aunt with the eye for opportunity. I thought about title documentation. By morning, my stomach felt hollow and sharp. I called the county recorder's office on my lunch break. The woman who answered sounded bored until I gave the address. Then she told me, matter-of-factly, that deed records were public and available online. Public. Available. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the property record from my office computer after everyone else had gone to lunch. My hands were so cold I had to tuck them under my thighs before I could type. When the document opened, I did not understand it at first. Not emotionally. I read the names once, then again, then a third time as if repetition might rearrange them into something merciful. Daniel Whitaker, Kendra Whitaker, and Denise Marlowe, Kendra's aunt. Added to the deed 6 weeks after closing. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. For a moment, the whole office seemed to tilt. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed too loudly. Somewhere in the hallway, someone laughed, and the sound felt indecent. They had not just hidden something from me. They had brought another person into the ownership structure of the house I had helped secure, without a word. My first clear thought was not anger. It was shame. Shame is a strange thing. It does not arrive announcing itself like anger does. Anger has heat. Anger makes noise. Shame slips in lower, quieter. It sits beside you in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and whispers that you should have known better. I kept staring at the screen long after I understood what I was looking at. The deed transfer had been recorded cleanly, formally, with all the proper legal language that turns betrayal into paperwork. Denise Marlowe's name sat there next to Daniel's and Kendra's as calmly as if she had always belonged there. There was no explanation on the page, no note, no apology. Just a document and a date. 6 weeks after closing. 6 weeks after I had signed my name because my son told me he needed help. A coworker named Patrice passed my doorway carrying a yogurt and a folder. "You okay, Lorraine?" I blinked hard and pulled my shoulders back. "Just a headache." She nodded and kept walking, and I sat there for another full minute without moving. The office smelled faintly of copier toner and peppermint gum. Phones rang somewhere up front. My body kept performing normal life while my mind circled one question over and over. Why? Not just why Denise. Why secrecy? Why risk? Why bring another person into the deed of a home built on my financial support, and then say nothing to me? By the time I drove home, the sky had turned the color of old dishwater. A storm was moving in, and the wind had started pushing leaves in spirals across the road. I parked in my driveway and sat there with the engine off, both hands on the steering wheel, listening to the ticking metal cool under the hood. I didn't want to go inside yet. Inside was my little yellow kitchen. My framed school pictures of Daniel in the hallway. The world as it had been that morning before I knew my son had helped smuggle another woman into the legal bones of that house. But eventually I went in. That is what women like me do. We go in. We put groceries away. We change clothes. We feed ourselves whether we are hungry or not. We keep living through the part that feels impossible. I set my purse on the counter and took the folded printout back out. The paper had already softened from being handled too much. I read it again. Then I called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I called a second time. This time he answered, sounding annoyed before I even spoke. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something. I know about Denise." Silence. Not confusion. Not "what do you mean?" Not "Mom, slow down." Just silence. My whole body went cold. "What?" I said carefully. "Is your wife's aunt doing on the deed to that house?" I heard him exhale through his nose. Then the faint muffled sound of a door closing, as if he had stepped away from someone before speaking. "It's not what you think." That sentence has ruined more trust than almost any other in the English language. "Then tell me what it is." He lowered his voice. "Denise helped us with some cash flow during closing. There were unexpected costs. Kendra's commission check got delayed, and so you added her to the deed." "It was temporary." "Temporary doesn't belong on a deed, Daniel." He was quiet. I pressed my fingertips into the counter so hard the edges hurt. Why was I not told? He let out a frustrated sound, half sigh, half groan. "Because we knew you'd react like this." I actually laughed then, but it came out broken. React like what? Like a woman whose name is tied to that mortgage while strangers get added behind her back. She's not a stranger. She is to me." He said nothing. The rain had started outside, soft at first, then harder, ticking against the window over the sink. I watched water bead and run down the glass while my son stood on the other end of the line defending the indefensible. "Did Kendra tell you not to tell me?" I asked. "That's not fair." That wasn't an answer. "It was a practical decision," he snapped. And there it was at last. Impatience, embarrassment, the hard little edge he only used with me when he needed me to feel unreasonable. I closed my eyes. A memory came to me so suddenly it was almost cruel. Daniel at 12, standing in our kitchen after he had broken the lamp in the living room roughhousing with a neighbor boy. He had started to blame the other child, then stopped halfway through the lie, because he saw my face. "I'm sorry," he had whispered. "I just didn't want you to be mad." Back then, conscience still lived near the surface. Now his voice sounded like a man explaining a spreadsheet. "Practical for whom?" I asked. "For us," he said. That little word landed like a slap. Us. Meaning not me. Not the woman whose credit had helped make that house possible. Not the mother whose risk had underwritten their future. Just the married unit. The new country from which I had been politely exiled. I spoke very quietly. "Do you hear yourself? Mom, you're making this bigger than it is." Bigger than hidden ownership? It's family support. I nearly dropped the phone. Family support. My own phrase, my own sacrifice, now turned inside out and used against me. I said, "Put Kendra on." No noches etaschen. No kertesi. Just no. The rain came down harder. The kitchen dimmed. I reached for the chair by the table and sat because my knees no longer trusted me. You lied to me, I said. We didn't lie. Then what do you call withholding something this serious from the person who co-signed your mortgage? He said nothing for a beat then. Mom, you're not on the deed. There it was. The first truly honest sentence of the conversation, though not in the way he meant it. I wasn't on the deed. I had all the liability and none of the protection. All the obligation, none of the control. They had kept my name where it could absorb risk, while carefully keeping it away from actual ownership. I felt something inside me settle then, not calm, exactly, but certainty. Like muddy water clearing enough for you to finally see the bottom. When were you planning to tell me? I asked. We were going to handle it. What does that mean? It means once things stabilized, Denise would come off. We'd refinance eventually. It's not permanent. Eventually. Temporary. Stabilized. Every word designed to push the truth into a foggy future, where accountability might dissolve. I stood up so quickly the chair legs scraped the floor. No, I said. You don't get to smooth this over with vague words. You involved another party in a property arrangement connected to a mortgage I guaranteed. You did it without telling me. You let me find out from county records. Mom. Was this your idea or Kendra's? His silence answered before his mouth did. That's not fair, he said again, but softer this time. No, it wasn't fair. Not to me. I ended the call because I could feel myself about to cry, and I was not going to let them hear that version of me. Not yet. The tears came anyway. I stood in my kitchen with rain rattling the windows and cried the way women cry when the wound is not only betrayal but recognition. Because suddenly so many little moments rearranged themselves into meaning. The will questions. The financial advisor. The late replies. The careful phrasing. The feeling, always faint but present, that Kendra was measuring not just my house, but my usefulness. It was not one bad decision. It was a pattern. And I had been standing inside it, calling it family. That night, Kendra texted me for the first time in weeks. I think emotions are high right now. Denise only stepped in to help bridge a gap. No one was trying to hurt you. Let's all sit down like adults and discuss next steps. Like adults. As if adulthood were something I had only just been invited into. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the folder where I kept all my financial paperwork and found every document I had from the original loan. The guarantee agreement. The disclosures. The title paperwork I had been shown at closing. I spread them across the dining room table beneath the brass lamp Daniel had bought me one Christmas with his first real bonus. Outside, the storm moved farther east. Thunder rumbled now and then from a distance, like anger traveling away. The house smelled faintly of rain and paper, and the lavender hand cream I had rubbed into my wrists without thinking. I read until midnight. Some clauses were straightforward. Some were written in the dense, airless language that seems designed to make ordinary people feel tired before they reach the dangerous parts. My eyes burned. My lower back ached. But I kept going. And somewhere near the back of the guarantor packet, under a section about material changes and lender notification, I found a sentence that made me sit straighter. I read it once. Then again. It did not say exactly what I wanted it to say. Life rarely offers such neat gifts. But it suggested something important. Certain transfers or changes affecting title, occupancy, or beneficial interest could trigger review rights, acceleration concerns, or disclosure obligations under the loan terms, especially when they materially altered the risk profile attached to the original underwriting. I am not a lawyer, but I know when language starts opening a door. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and called a real estate attorney whose name my friend Janice had once scribbled on a church bulletin after a boundary dispute with her neighbor. His office was above a bakery downtown. When I arrived, the hallway smelled like sugar and coffee and old carpet. I sat in a waiting room with mauve chairs and fake ficus plants, clutching my folder like it contained oxygen. The attorney's name was Peter Halloran. Mid-60s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, face like someone who had spent decades listening before speaking. He wore a plain navy tie and did not try to charm me. which I appreciated immediately. After I explained everything, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Let me make sure I understand," he said. "You co-signed the mortgage, but you were not placed on title. Then, after closing, the borrowers added a third party to the deed without telling you." Yes. "And that third party is a relative of the borrower's spouse." Yes. He nodded slowly. "Mrs. Whitaker, that was a reckless thing for them to do." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. Reckless. Not misunderstood. Not emotional. Not complicated. Reckless. I felt tears press behind my eyes again, but I held them there. "Do I have any rights?" I asked. He gave the kind of answer honest lawyers give. The kind that does not flatter you with certainty. "You may not have direct ownership rights simply by being guarantor," he said. "But depending on the exact loan documents, the deed transfer, and what disclosures were made to the lender, they may have created serious leverage for you." Leverage. Now there was a word I could work with. Leverage. The word hummed in my mind as I drove home from Peter Halloran's office. The late morning sun broke through scattered clouds, painting the streets in gold. And I watched the light play on the rooftops of my neighborhood, the way it always had, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. But I knew it had. I thought about Daniel and Kendra, about Denise, about the way they had assumed I would simply accept being used, as though my years of sacrifice and love were the kind of currency you could spend once and discard. By the time I got home, I had formed a plan, not of rage exactly, but of quiet, precise action. Revenge wasn't about shouting or breaking things. It was about restoring balance, about teaching respect without losing my own dignity. I sat at my dining table with the folder of documents spread before me again. I poured a cup of black coffee strong, with just a little cream, and inhaled its bitter warmth. The smell reminded me of mornings after Daniel's first school bus ride, when we'd sit together quietly and sip coffee before the day began. That memory, soft and steady, reminded me why I was doing this carefully. The first step was gathering evidence. Every email, every scanned mortgage statement, every county record I could find. I noted dates, inconsistencies, and discrepancies. Each piece was a thread, and I intended to weave them into a net that would hold firmly. I created a folder on my computer labeled Truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. That was the one thing they had taken for granted, that I wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, wouldn't act. A week passed. I did not call them. I did not confront them. I watched quietly as their social media continued to paint their lives in perfect, staged moments. Kendra smiling in the kitchen with Denise in the background, Daniel holding a first home sign, the kind of filtered happiness that conceals almost everything. Then one Saturday morning, I called the lender. Not Daniel. Not Kendra. The bank itself. I spoke with a loan officer named Melissa, who listened patiently while I explained that I was a guarantor, and had noticed a change in the deed post-closing. She hesitated once, then typed something into her system. "You're correct," she said finally. "Our records show that the deed was amended, and the lender was notified." However, I leaned closer to the phone, heart pounding, hands clutching the counter. "However," she continued, "the mortgage terms require notification from all guarantors when any third party is added to the deed. It appears that notification may not have been properly documented. We may need a formal review." Leverage. I hung up the phone, feeling the tight knot in my chest loosen slightly. The first domino had moved. I did not call Daniel that day. I did not go to their house. Instead, I spent the next few evenings going over the loan documents again, reading every clause carefully, making notes in a small notebook with a blue cover Daniel had given me years ago. It was strange how comfort could come from familiar things, even when the situation itself was unfamiliar and painful. By Thursday, I felt ready. I called Peter Halloran again and arranged a meeting. "I want to address this strategically," I told him. "Not to humiliate them, not to create drama, but to make sure they understand consequences. Respect, if you will." He nodded. "It's important you do this with facts, Mrs. Whitaker, not emotion. Emotion clouds judgment. Leverage only works when it's grounded in documented reality." I left the office that day feeling a mix of cold satisfaction and sad nostalgia. Daniel had been my little boy, my baby. The one whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose lunch I had packed, whose school projects I had stayed up all night helping him complete. And now he was a man, yes, but a man who had treated me like a convenience, a stepping stone. That evening, I drafted a careful email to Daniel and Kendra. I did not accuse. I stated facts. I cited documents. I asked questions that could not be brushed off with vagueness or charm. I CC'd Peter, subtly indicating that I had professional guidance. Dear Daniel and Kendra, I've reviewed the property documents and the deed amendments carefully. As the guarantor on this mortgage, I have concerns about how the recent transfer of ownership occurred, particularly regarding disclosure and lender notification. I would appreciate your clarification on the timeline, the involvement of Denise Marlowe, and your intended plan to comply with mortgage terms. Please respond by Friday. I have also copied my legal counsel to ensure accuracy of interpretation. I read the email twice before sending it, feeling a measure of calm settle over me. For the first time since I had signed those papers, I felt that power was returning to its rightful place, measured, quiet, and controlled. The next morning, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail. Kendra texted. I ignored it. By Friday, they had responded with carefully worded defenses, justifying every action, softening every misstep with phrases like temporary measure and no intent to harm. I smiled. My leverage did not come from anger. It came from clarity and patience. I replied succinctly, pointing out the obligations and possible ramifications under the lender's rules, with references to specific clauses, dates, and forms. I did not threaten. I did not plead. I simply reminded them that actions have consequences. And in that space, in the pause that followed my clear, factual message, I felt the first ripple of justice. By Monday, Daniel called. Not Kendra. Not Denise. Daniel. Alone. Mom, he said, voice quieter than it had been in months. We need to talk. In person. I had been ready for that call. I had been waiting for it, letting them stumble into the realization that shortcuts and omissions have limits when the person you wronged refuses to stay silent. I scheduled a meeting at my kitchen table, the same table where he had first asked me to sign away my house. I cleaned it meticulously that morning. Burnt toast smell from the coffee, the faint scent of lemon polish from wiping the surfaces. I placed the folder of documents neatly in the center. I wanted them to understand something more than anything. That respect cannot be borrowed, gifted, or assumed. It must be earned. And when it is absent, consequences follow, in one form or another. When Daniel arrived, his shoulders were tight, his eyes flicked nervously to the folder, and for the first time in months, I saw a trace of the boy who used to look to me for guidance, not just permission. I motioned for him to sit. Daniel, I said calmly, let's go through this together. He nodded, and for the first time, I felt the room tilt back toward balance. Daniel sat across from me, hands clasped on the table, the corners of his mouth tight. He glanced at the folder, then back at me, as if hoping the storm would have passed by simply ignoring it. But storms don't pass because you close your eyes. They pass when someone faces them. And today, that someone was him. I opened the folder slowly, spreading the papers in front of him, careful not to raise my voice, careful not to show too much emotion. Calm, measured, precise. That was my strategy. I wanted him to understand fully that this was not about punishment. It was about accountability. Daniel, I began, this is the deed as it was filed. Look here, Denise Marlowe is listed as an owner. That's 6 weeks after the closing. He swallowed and nodded, not yet speaking. Now, the mortgage agreement you asked me to co-sign states that any material change affecting title must be disclosed to all guarantors. That's me. I was not informed. Did you notify the bank when you added her? No, he admitted softly, eyes downcast. I thought it would be easier to fix later. Later is not a plan. I said gently but firmly. Later is a word people use to hide mistakes they don't want to confront. You involved another person in a legal contract tied directly to my finances. That is not a minor oversight. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated, embarrassed, and I realized finally uncomfortable in a way he hadn't been before. I just didn't want to worry you. Kendra and I thought we were handling it. Handling it. I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. Do you know what it feels like to discover a deed change for a house that carries my financial liability without my knowledge? Do you know what that does to trust? He did not answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting it sit heavy between us. He needed to feel it, not just hear it. Finally, he said, almost in a whisper, I didn't think you'd understand. I leaned back, letting the words hang. Daniel, understanding doesn't mean condoning. I understand many things. I understand mistakes. I understand fear and love, and the desire to protect someone you care about. But that doesn't excuse breaking the trust between a mother and her child, or turning her into a silent guarantor while others reap benefits. He looked up, eyes glistening. Not tears yet, but the sheen of someone realizing how far he had strayed. I continued. Here's the thing. I am not angry for anger's sake. I am angry because respect was taken for granted. And respect is not something borrowed, it's earned. You and Kendra forgot that when you added Denise without telling me. That has consequences. His jaw tightened. Mom, what do you mean? I opened the next section of the folder, a copy of the lender's notice I had received. I called the bank. I asked about disclosure obligations for guarantors. They confirmed that you were required to notify me. You didn't. That means there's leverage here, legal, procedural leverage that could be significant if necessary. Daniel swallowed hard. You mean you could? Yes, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. I could take action to protect my financial interests. But that is not my goal. He exhaled, relief and fear mingling in one tight breath. Then what is your goal? To teach, I said. To show that family is not a free pass. That trust is fragile, and respect is not optional. You made a choice. Now you get to make another. How to repair it? He nodded a little shakily. We understand. I just didn't think. You didn't think about me. I finished for him. And that is exactly what this is about. It is not about revenge or money. It is about recognition. Recognition that I am a person with rights and responsibilities, just as you are. He leaned back in the chair and ran both hands over his face. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I let the words sink in. Sorrow, humility, and remorse. These were the first steps toward mending what had been broken. But words alone were not enough. Actions had to follow. Here's what we'll do, I said, outlining the path forward. First, Denise's name must be removed from the deed legally, with proper notice to all parties. Second, any future changes, no matter how small, must be discussed with me before action. And third, we will review the mortgage statements together for the next 6 months to ensure there is transparency. Daniel exhaled heavily, nodding. Relief, finally tempered by responsibility. Yes, Mom. That's fair. That's exactly what we should have done from the start. I could see the lesson taking root. And though I felt the sharp sting of betrayal fade, I knew the memory of it would stay with me. A reminder of both human fragility and the power of calm, measured action. We spent the next hour going over the documents together. I pointed out clauses, explained terms, and clarified what had been required legally. He listened attentively, sometimes interrupting with questions, sometimes silent, absorbing the weight of what he had done. By the time he left that evening, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. Not triumph, not revenge, but a restoration of balance. I closed the folder, wiped down the table, and poured myself a small glass of wine. Outside, the sun had set, leaving the sky in shades of deep purple and orange. The day had been long, but something had shifted. In that quiet moment, I realized the true lesson of the ordeal. Generosity is a gift, but it does not obligate one to blind trust. Respect cannot be assumed. And when it is ignored, it must be reclaimed, not with anger, but with wisdom. Later that week, I received a call from Kendra. This time, her tone was different, more careful, softer. She asked questions about the process for correcting the deed, about paperwork, and about proper communication. It was the first sign that she, too, understood the cost of assuming compliance without transparency. And slowly, in small deliberate steps, the household began to shift. Daniel and Kendra started communicating more honestly, including me in decisions related to the mortgage and property. Denise's name was formally removed, and all filings were corrected. The process was painstaking but effective. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt the weight in my chest lift. Not completely gone. Lessons like these leave traces, but lighter, clearer. It was in that quiet victory, built not on confrontation but on patience, diligence, and moral clarity, that I realized revenge is not in hurting someone. True revenge is in reclaiming your dignity, setting boundaries, and teaching respect through calm, unwavering action. The days that followed were quieter, though far from easy. Every interaction with Daniel and Kendra carried the subtle tension of a lesson learned. I noticed small changes. The way Daniel would pause to check with me before making a decision about the house. The way Kendra included me in conversations about renovations or furniture. They were cautious now, respectful in a way that felt deliberate, almost measured. It was strange seeing them operate under these new terms. The same son who once brushed aside my questions, the same daughter-in-law who once smiled past me while plotting with her aunt, now approached me differently. Not with fear, exactly, but with awareness. They had felt the weight of consequence. And in that awareness, I saw the power of restraint, patience, and precision. One afternoon, I stopped by their home, not unannounced, but with the pretense of dropping off a few garden plants. Daniel opened the door, glanced at the bag, then at me. "Mom," he said. The warmth of ordinary life filled the rooms, and I realized that this was the real victory. Not the legal leverage, not the confrontation, but the reclamation of place, voice, and dignity within a family I loved deeply. I took a deep breath, walking through the kitchen, noticing the small details I had missed before. The worn edge of the countertop, the crooked cabinet handle Daniel had yet to fix, Kendra's favorite mugs lined neatly in the cupboard. Life continued, imperfect and messy, but honest. Later that evening, Daniel pulled me aside while Kendra was in the living room arranging photos. "Mom," he said, hesitating. I want to apologize again. For everything. I should have thought. I should have come to you first." I reached out and took his hand. "Daniel, the lesson is more important than the mistake. You've learned it. And that matters more than the past." He nodded, and I felt a weight lift. Not just for him, but for me as well. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt. They no longer held the power they once had. I had taken them, transformed them into clarity, and reclaimed my peace. That night, back in my own home, I sat at my kitchen table with the rain tapping gently against the windows, the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the soft glow of the lamp. I reflected on what had happened. The trust that had been broken, the deception, the careful reclaiming of balance. I realized that life doesn't often hand you justice neatly. It doesn't offer closure in clean lines or dramatic explosions. But it does give you opportunities to act wisely, to assert boundaries, to teach lessons quietly yet firmly. I thought about my son, about Kendra, about Denise, and about myself. About the woman who had signed papers believing she was helping family. The woman who had discovered betrayal. And the woman who had turned that betrayal into action grounded in patience, intelligence, and moral clarity. And I understood something essential. Revenge is not about causing pain. True revenge, if it can even be called that, is in reclaiming your dignity, establishing boundaries, and showing those who underestimate you that respect is earned, not assumed. As I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, I smiled softly. There was still work to be done, small adjustments, ongoing reminders of the lessons learned. But I felt steady, strong, certain that I had acted not in anger, but in justice. Later, when Daniel called again, this time to thank me for walking him through the paperwork, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, not pride, just a sense of balance restored, a recognition that the lesson had been absorbed. I thought about the future, about the importance of clear communication, honesty, and respect within a family, about how generosity must be paired with boundaries. And I felt a warmth settle over me. The comfort that comes from knowing that even in a difficult, painful situation, I had maintained my integrity. I sat back, listening to the quiet of my home, the ticking of the clock, the soft rustle of leaves outside. And I realized that this was the true reward: peace. Weeks turned into months, and the tension that had hung over our family began to dissolve. Daniel and Kendra approached me differently now, not just with politeness, but with genuine consideration. Decisions about the house were discussed openly. I was included in plans for renovations, for landscaping, even for their long-term financial choices. They no longer assumed my presence was optional. They treated it as integral. One Saturday, I arrived to find them both in the living room, the floor scattered with paint samples and swatches of fabric. Daniel looked up and grinned. "Mom, you're just in time. Kendra wants your opinion on the drapes for the dining room." Kendra held up a pale sage green fabric. "I thought it might complement the walls. What do you think?" I studied it carefully, noting the soft texture, the way the color caught the afternoon light. "It's beautiful. It warms the room without overpowering it." They exchanged a glance and smiled. That simple act, considering my opinion, valuing my input, felt monumental. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a signal that respect had returned. Over the next few weeks, I helped them organize their finances, reviewed documents, and guided them through the final steps of removing Denise's name from the deed. Each meeting, each phone call, each carefully written email reinforced the boundaries we had established and the lessons they had learned. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about relationships. I noticed small changes in Daniel. He listened more, asked for guidance instead of assuming, and acknowledged my contributions openly. Kendra softened too. She stopped issuing orders with a smile and started engaging in dialogue, asking questions rather than dictating answers. Even Denise, when she called from Arizona, was careful and professional, showing deference I hadn't seen before. One evening, Daniel and Kendra invited me over for dinner. I walked into the house to the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh herbs. The table was set meticulously, the candles lit. I felt the warmth of family, the kind that comes from both reconciliation and hard-won respect. After dinner, we sat in the living room sipping tea. Daniel looked at me with a seriousness that caught me off guard. "Mom, I want to say something," he began. "I know we hurt you. And I know we took your trust for granted. I can't change what happened, but I want you to know that we see it now, and we're committed to doing better. You've taught us a lesson we'll never forget." Kendra nodded, squeezing his hand. "We owe you more than apologies. We owe you respect, and we intend to give it from now on." I smiled, feeling the lump in my throat loosen. "That's all I ever wanted," I said softly. "For you to understand the importance of honesty, transparency, and consideration. Not just for me, but for your future together." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only comes when old wounds begin to heal. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and the sun set in shades of pink and gold, casting a warm glow across the room. Later, as I drove home, I reflected on the journey, the anger, the betrayal, the sleepless nights spent poring over documents, and the careful steps I had taken to reclaim my dignity. The lesson had been learned not through confrontation alone, but through measured action, patience, and moral clarity. I realized something important. Revenge isn't about causing suffering. True justice comes from reclaiming your power, setting boundaries, and teaching respect in a way that leaves integrity intact. By the time I walked into my own home that night, I felt lighter. The storm that had once consumed my heart had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen table, listening to the quiet hum of my house. The faint aroma of rain lingered in the air, and the soft ticking of the clock reminded me of life's rhythm. The steady passage of time, carrying lessons, healing, and growth. I thought about my son, my daughter-in-law, and even Denise. Each had played a role in this story, and each had learned, in their own way, that actions have consequences. And I too had learned to trust my instincts, to stand firm in the face of deception, and to turn betrayal into a lesson rather than a wound that festers. That night, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months, a calm certainty that comes from having faced hurt head-on, and having emerged with both dignity and purpose intact. The following weeks were quieter, but they carried a new energy, one built on accountability and cautious respect. Daniel began consulting me on decisions about the house. Even small choices like which paint to buy or where to place a new bookshelf were discussed first with me. He asked questions instead of assuming answers, and for the first time, I noticed genuine thoughtfulness in his tone. Kendra, too, had changed. The haughty confidence she once displayed in the kitchen and in financial matters softened into collaborative energy. She asked for my opinion, acknowledged my expertise, and even included me in conversations about household budgeting. I could see the difference. It was subtle, but unmistakable. One afternoon, I went over to check on their progress with a minor repair project. Daniel was painting a corner of the living room, while Kendra sorted through flooring samples. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint aroma of lemon cleaner, and the sun streamed through the windows, bouncing off the freshly painted walls. I smiled quietly to myself. Ordinary life, yes, but life with boundaries restored. Mom, Daniel said, pausing mid-stroke. Can you take a look at this corner? I can't tell if the color matches the rest of the wall. I walked over, inspecting the paint carefully, noting the subtle difference in hue. It blends nicely. Just a touch lighter in the corner, but nothing noticeable. Thanks, he said, relief softening his features. I don't know what I'd do without your advice. Kendra chimed in, holding up a swatch. And what do you think about this flooring option? Mom, I really want your input. I studied it, the texture, the color, how it caught the light. It's perfect, I said. It will give the room warmth without being overpowering. They exchanged a glance, and I noticed something new, a quiet respect. They were no longer just children of mine. They were partners in a shared life, and I was no longer an outsider in decisions I had helped enable from the start. That evening, I returned home, tired but content. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, the comforting scent filling the kitchen. I sat at my table, the same table where I had once laid out all the mortgage documents, feeling the calm that comes after storms have passed. The rain had returned, soft tapping against the windows, a gentle rhythm that matched the pace of my thoughts. I reflected on the journey, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the painstaking reclaiming of my voice and authority. I realized that the power hadn't come from anger or confrontation. It had come from clarity, persistence, and moral conviction. I had turned the situation into a lesson, not just for them, but for myself. That dignity is never to be surrendered, that boundaries are necessary, and that patience paired with intelligence is a stronger tool than outrage. A week later, Daniel and Kendra invited me over for dinner. The table was set carefully, with candles and flowers, the meal aromatic and inviting. As we ate, conversation flowed freely, laughter emerging in easy bursts. The tension that had defined our interactions for months had melted away, replaced by mutual understanding and respect. After dinner, Daniel looked at me, sincere. Mom, I want to thank you again. For helping us through the paperwork, for guiding us, and for showing us the importance of honesty and communication. I don't say it enough, but I truly appreciate everything you've done. Kendra added, Yes, Mom. We've learned a lot. We'll never take your trust for granted again. I smiled softly, feeling a warmth that had been missing for so long. That's all I ever wanted, I said. For you to understand that respect and honesty are the foundation of family, and that trust must be protected, always. We spent the evening together, sharing stories and laughter, the house filled with warmth, light, and the comfort of reconciliation. Driving home later that night, I realized something profound. Revenge isn't about hurting those who wrong you. True power comes from reclaiming your dignity, setting clear boundaries, and teaching respect through steady, deliberate action. I had done that. I had turned betrayal into a lesson, anger into understanding, and despair into clarity. Sitting at my kitchen table, the rain continuing to fall softly outside, I felt peace. Not the absence of problems, not perfection, but balance, integrity, and the quiet satisfaction of having acted wisely when it mattered most. The weeks that followed brought a gentle rhythm back into my life. Daniel and Kendra continued to consult me on decisions, big and small. They invited me over for weekend meals more regularly, asked for my guidance, and included me in discussions about their finances and home improvements. I could feel the subtle shift in the air. They no longer assumed my presence as an afterthought. They sought it. One Saturday morning, I arrived with a small bouquet of daisies for their dining table. Daniel opened the door with a shy smile, Kendra hovering behind him. "Mom, you're just in time," Daniel said. "We were about to head out and could use your opinion." They showed me a small nook by the living room window they were trying to turn into a reading corner. I examined the cushions, the rug, the tiny lamp they'd picked out. "This is lovely," I said. "It will be a perfect little sanctuary. Warm, cozy, inviting. You've chosen well." Kendra smiled and held up a small stack of books. "Mom, what do you think of the arrangement? Too cluttered?" "Not at all," I said. "It feels personal, alive. That's the point of a reading corner. It should reflect who you are, not just how it looks." As I walked through the house, I noticed other subtle changes. Daniel had repaired a few things on his own, no longer brushing aside small maintenance tasks. Kendra's touch was evident in the careful organization of the kitchen and the cozy placement of furniture. The home felt lived in, yes, but lived in thoughtfully. After my visit, I drove home feeling a sense of calm that had been missing for months. The betrayal, the frustration, the late nights spent poring over documents, all of that had transformed into a quiet power. I understood now that true authority does not come from force or anger. It comes from knowledge, patience, and the courage to act decisively when others underestimate you. Back at my own home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. The storm outside mirrored the calm inside, a gentle rhythm, not violent or threatening. I reflected on everything that had happened. I had helped my son, trusted him, and been taken for granted. I had discovered deceit and had the option to react in anger or seek petty revenge. Instead, I had chosen strategy, clarity, and moral integrity. I had used the knowledge I gained, the leverage I had uncovered, not to punish, but to teach. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my peace. Weeks later, the final paperwork was complete. Denise's name was removed from the deed. Daniel and Kendra had formally acknowledged their obligation to inform me of any future changes. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but the foundation had been rebuilt. Honesty, communication, and mutual respect. One evening, I received a message from Kendra. "Mom, thank you for guiding us. We understand now, and we will never take your trust for granted again. Love, Kendra." I smiled softly, feeling the warmth in my chest. This was the reward. Not the leverage, not the confrontation, but the acknowledgement, the respect, and the subtle restoration of balance in our family. I placed my cup on the counter and looked out the window at the garden, wet with the rain, leaves glistening in the fading light. Life was moving forward. I had faced betrayal, navigated deception, and emerged with my dignity intact. I had turned a painful situation into a lesson that would shape our family for years to come. And as I sat there, I thought about the true nature of justice. It is not about causing harm or seeking revenge. It is about reclaiming your power, asserting boundaries, and teaching respect through measured, thoughtful action. That is the kind of lesson that lasts. I poured a final sip of tea, letting the warmth fill me. My home, my peace, my voice. None of it had been lost, and all of it had been reclaimed. Sitting here now, looking back on everything that happened, I realized something important. Life often tests us in ways we never expect. People we love can hurt us, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes deliberately. And the choice we have isn't always about getting even. It's about how we respond, how we reclaim our voice, our dignity, and our peace. I chose patience, clarity, and deliberate action over anger. I chose to teach a lesson rather than to lash out. And in the end, I found that true power comes not from punishing others, but from standing firm, setting boundaries, and insisting on respect. Would you have done the same if it were your family? Would you have let betrayal pass? Or would you have acted to protect your dignity and teach a lesson that lasts? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your stories or reflections in the comments below. And if this story spoke to you, consider subscribing for more real-life stories, told with honesty, heart, and a gentle reminder that even through betrayal, we can find strength, clarity, and peace. Because at the end of the day, it's not about revenge, it's about reclaiming yourself.